Jovan Buha! Buha!
Yo, I'm Jovan Buha, Lakers beat writer for The Athletic, and welcome to episode 81 of Buha's Block. On today's episode, I am thrilled to be joined by first-time guest, longtime friend, longtime mentor. I've known this guy since 2011 when I broke into the industry, and he's been steering me largely in the right direction, I would say. Dan Woike of the LA Times. We are long overdue in having you on. Dan, how you doing today?
I'm so excited to be here. I've heard a lot about this show, Jovan, through the years. Heard a lot about it at your wedding. It was really fun. Like one of the big topics at your wedding. It was your wife's. It was you and your wife someday growing your family and the process involved in that. Like an emphasis on the process. And then
I may have said that in my vows, yes.
Yeah. And then also, very unserious, by the way. And then also, your mother, this is great. This is how you know it's a good podcast. Your mother, during her speech about how much she loves her baby boy, how much she just and it was really, really emotional, was just like, he's such a good son. He's such a good father. And he's such a good podcaster. And it was like, it was very nice. It was very sweet. Glad she listens. I can't get my wife to read any of my stories. So I'm glad that your family supports you.
Well, and look, I think it's working because we just hit 20,000 subscribers last night. So
wow.
wanted to thank everyone for really started taking this seriously about 11 months ago and grown it to 20,000 subscribers on YouTube. So I appreciate you all for subscribing and supporting, watching, and hopefully we get some more subscribers off of today's episode. Depending, I
think it's going to be about 17.5. We're gonna lose 2,500. Let's go.
We'll see. So today's episode, we're going to be doing mid-season grades. I'm going to be presenting Dan with a grade for each roster player. That there's a couple guys, Vando, Christian Wood, that I'm not going to be grading just because I think it's hard to grade players who haven't played. So I'm going to give those guys incompletes, but everyone else is getting a grade. I have some numbers to back up my rationale, and then Dan will give me some grades.
I'm going to grade your grades. I'm going to grade
my grades and give me feedback, and then we can have a little bit of a back and forth. Before we get started on the player-specific grades, the Lakers are now at the midway point of the season, 23-18. They are 13th in offense, they are 22nd in defense, and they are 21st in net rating. 6th in the West, on pace to win 46 games. Do you have any quick thoughts on where this group is at the midway point?
Really putting the mid in midway point. I kind of think, they're a good-ish basketball team. That's kind of where I'm at on them. They are rarely a great team. They are sometimes an awful team, and they're mostly good. When they played great teams, they've been close largely. When they've only, they have clunkers in them. They haven't really hit too many of these oh my God, this is the team. I guess Sacramento, maybe the win against Memphis is kind of their best wins of the season. Early on, the first week of the year, they look like a really good basketball team. But just the variance is just too high. And that to me is maybe that's one of those things that you just sort of figure out, where it's the thing happens and it clicks totally into place and the inconsistency goes away. Or it might just be who they are. And if they're an inconsistent team, then it's just sort of a crapshoot. You hope you get in the playoffs and you hope that you catch the right matchup and you play the right style at the right time. I mean, that's kind of where I'm at on them, Jovan. I mean, I think we have kind of a running joke when we see each other at games that we always think they're going to lose. And it is just sort of every night kind of feels like it could be a loss. Most games you feel like they're going to be kind of competitive. Occasionally, there's a matchup archetype that I think they can't beat. Right. And it is I was not surprised they lost to the Clippers. I'm not surprised that they were swept by Detroit. I'm not surprised that they lost to Houston. That is sort of the archetype for me, is athletic, physical, pressure on the wings, run up and down the court. They struggle with those teams.
I also think for me that there's like two factors I look at where are they at home or not? They have the third best home record in the West. They have the second worst road record among the top 10 teams in the playoffs / play-in. And then looking at above 500 teams or not, they have the second best record against teams below 500 and the second worst record against teams above 500. Yeah. So it's kind of been like, if they're at home, they have a shot against just about anybody. If they're on the road, they can lose to almost anybody. And then are they playing an above 500 team or not? The crazy, like one crazy thing with last night's win was I was just curious, like how many 20-point wins do they have this season? They have two. That was
my guess. I was just guessing too. Yeah.
Last night was their largest margin of victory of the season, 23 points against the Wizards. So like, and then the other 20 point was against Toronto. So it's like they have some really good wins. I don't want to like discount that, but in terms of like, even last night, it was a relatively like close competitive game until the beginning of the fourth quarter. Then they like Washington was hanging around. They had a couple runs where they got it into single digits, and then finally LA put their foot down and blew them out in the fourth. So it's like, I felt like last night's win could have been, it would have been nice to see them just win a game by like 25-30, basically for the entire game. They don't really have another one. Even the Toronto game, I think, was like kind of a similar thing. For a little while. Yeah, and then they blew them out. So that would be kind of my only thing is like, so as they said, like nothing's coming easy for this group.
Yeah, so kind of an interesting thing. So I was talking to some players last night after the game, kind of like off to the side, as you know, as we do, and they were encouraged with last night. Like I was surprised actually how encouraged they were, because I think everybody pretty much agreed that Washington is bad, like bad, right?
They've lost 11 in a row.
Yeah, like that. It's not a very good basketball team, and it's not like a great litmus test. You know, I think in my story I wrote that it's almost never easy for the Lakers. Well, like they played almost never last night. Like the cure for almost never last night. But process oriented, I think they were really happy. To me, like that is like the LeBron style of game that you want to get. It's one of the keys. We'll talk about this in grades. I think it's like one of the keys to unlocking maybe the next level for this team is like LeBron getting to say, I'm going to just pick a number, 25 triple doubles this season. He's got 9 already. Like turning LeBron into like a triple double machine, I think is like one of the keys to this team. And focusing that. The aggregators are going to say Jovan that. I say that LeBron should be more like Russell Westbrook. That is not what I am saying specifically, just to be 100% clear.
The audience knows how I feel about aggregators, so that doesn't stop them from aggregating. But
yes, I think that was like the LeBron version, right? Like 80 hard rolling, like the team connecting on lobs, on baseline cuts. They made no threes. They shot it like trash, basically. Austin Reaves was kind of funny after the game. I mean, he had an awful offensive shooting game. That the lob that he blew in the fourth quarter, he was so excited to get to throw it off the backboard. Yeah, and off the backboard lob, and he almost made a layup. And he was like, "It was damn near the only shot I made all night." It's basically like they didn't like the results weren't great, and I think JJ says after the game. But I think process wise, like guys were pretty encouraged. Now that was a low resistance team, right?
Yeah.
Like. They are about to play a high resistance team on Thursday in Boston. We'll see, I think, if they're able to kind of replicate that process. But like, I think they've been encouraged at times with that type of stuff. It's just hard to do. They just don't do it all the time. And that's what's so frustrating.
I've said it. It's cliche. Like their only consistency this season is being inconsistent. And it's really been like they have these like 5 to 7 games. They're a top 10 offense, bottom 10 defense. 5 to 7 games, they're a top 10 defense, bottom 10 offense. They can't quite put it together on both sides of the ball. Last thing before we get into the grades, there was an ESPN report today by Shams Charania about LeBron and AD and them not feeling like there's a trade necessarily out there that the Lakers can make to actualize this group's championship aspirations. Like quickly with the trade deadline about 2 weeks away, where are you at with what you think this team is going to be doing? And is there a move you see that, I don't think there's anything that's going to put them on the Boston, Cleveland, OKC level, but can maybe get them into like that second tier with the New Yorks, Dallases, Denvers, Milwaukee's, whoever else you want to put in there?
Yeah, I mean, so, in regards to the report, I mean, I think that, like, LeBron and Anthony Davis have never really been shy about their desire to, like, keep 2029 in mind. Like, they're not really thinking that way. Like, this is a very win now situation. I've written this and I've called it, LeBron, like, maybe the most win now player of all time at this moment. Like, there's maybe never been a person in a situation where win now applies to this guy who's doing stuff at 40 years old you've never seen before in a physical sport. It's different than Tom Brady, right? Like, he's running up and down. He's dunking on Valanciunas. Like, that's just different, right? So I think, I'm not surprised to see their names attached to something like this. I've had conversations with guys in that locker room, and I think there is, if you talk to people who are realistic and you talk to people who understand kind of the current state of trade winds and understand the salary cap and some of the limitations, there aren't easy answers. There aren't. And I think, like, there haven't been for a couple of years now. It's basically, to steal another thing that I've said a lot, it's the Goodwill Hunting math problem. Like, they walk by it every day, and they're sort of waiting for the janitor to sweep by and figure it out. Like, it's very complicated, right? It's a complicated equation. I think to try to understand their limited assets, what they don't have a lot to send out. So if you're going to send it out, you got to make sure it's the right thing to do. And you're also not totally sure even what you have in house. And it kind of leads to, I think, paralysis, for Rob Pelinka in the front office, where because there isn't an easy answer, there's a lack of action. I tend to agree. I think I was reading something that you said on Legion Hoop Central or something like that about this, where
direct quotes. Yeah.
Where it's like going to be maybe more of a minor move. Yeah. I mean, look, I think they're going to look for stuff that makes sense, but there's a disconnect between what a first round pick means to them versus what it can get you on the market with the salaries you have to send out. There is like a real, like, there's a different value, to the Lakers in terms of what they have versus what they're willing to, I think, put in. And they don't want to lose a trade. They don't want to lose a trade. And I don't think anybody really wants to lose a trade, but, like, take a look at what, like, Phoenix just did, right? Like, that deal.
I was going to say the Lakers technically could have made that deal.
100. No, there's no technically about it. Like, they for sure could have. They could do that trade. They could do that trade twice if they wanted to. They could wake up tomorrow with 6 first-round picks, okay? And people would see that and be like, oh, my God, they have 6 first-round picks. We can do anything. No. Like, there is a reason why Utah did that, right? It is like a payday loan. It is a cash loan. Like, those picks are not good picks, generally speaking, right? Like, they give them some flexibility for Phoenix. Mark Stein had this in his newsletter. I thought it was really smart. It's kind of what I heard, too, which was that, like, people, like, saw that right away. You saw Jimmy Butler's shoes. Like, oh, my God, they're going to trade for Jimmy Butler. If I was Miami, I would have wanted the pick that they sent to Utah. That's the pick you want. You don't want Cleveland's first-round pick in this draft. It's going to be 29 or 30. What I think they could do, Phoenix, with that pick, is they might be able to get off Nurkic now. We're trading an unprotected 2031 to get off the use of Nurkic in a trade where you bring back the player you like was probably not tenable for Phoenix. But, like, if you're able to split it up, even if you're getting, say, 80 cents to the dollar for it, you're able to spend it a little differently, I guess. So I think the Lakers are in a similar position where their first-round picks are really valuable. And so if you're going to trade them, they need to be for something that is really valuable coming back, like really valuable. And there's a gap between those two things, and I don't think they don't totally know how much of a gap they're willing to accept.
And that's quickly, and then we'll get into the grades. Like, they're kind of in a weird spot because, to be honest, their 2 second-round picks that they have right now are not very valuable. If you look at it's their second-round pick and the Clippers' second-round pick, so those are projected to be like late 40s, early 50s, which I think looking out, I mean, we were talking about this last night. I kind of made the joke that like a 2027 second might be sexier because you don't quite know where it's going to be in terms of like
you didn't say it like that. You said it might be sexier. Like you really hit the sexy part of it, to be totally honest.
Oh man,
it was like I was reading a teenager's life.
It was an unserious night last night, but so I think like I don't like. I do think like some of the seconds they traded to Brooklyn, for example, in the DFS trade had more value than the current seconds they have right now, right? So, but then they have this 2029 first and 2031 first, and those two have a lot of value, and they can't protect them, or the protections are kind of complicated. That they could trade to acquire a second round pick and then technically protect it, but as things stand, it's difficult to protect those picks. And then so the value gap between like their 2025 seconds and a 2029 first or 2031 first, that's a wide gap. And you almost like the type of player you can get in between that, it's a pretty vast difference in my opinion. So it's like you're either offering seconds that like aren't really moving the needle, which maybe depending on the contract, depending on the player, a team would entertain, or you're potentially overpaying drastically with a first round pick. Now, to your point about the win now thing, like I've been on the side of just go for it and then figure it out at the end of the LeBron AD era. But I understand it's easy to say that. It's easy to say that, but it's like, then kind of what was the whole point of this if you were just like, I mean, it almost, that's a whole other conversation, but let's get into. So
really, I would say really quickly, last thing on this, and I've been kind of workshopping this as sort of like the Lakers situation, and you tell me if you think this is appropriate. You and I have been in Las Vegas together, correct? Yeah. We have been in a Las Vegas casino together at say like 3 a.m. This is a thing that happens in Las Vegas. So like, I think like the Lakers are like, it's 3 a.m. They're like 5 tequila sodas in. They're not like hammered. But like they're at a tipping point. Okay,
I'm a lightweight, so I would be hammered with 5 kilos.
Yes, you would be. Yes, you would be. But like and it's the last night you're in Vegas, or one of the last nights you're near Vegas, and you only have like $200. You can't go back to the ATM, and you're walking around the casino floor. You're kind of drunk. You might make a bad decision. You might go to bed. Like you don't know what you're gonna do, right? And if you could go to the tables and play the $200, and it's not impossible that you leave with 10,000. Like that happens, right? It's much more likely that you will lose your $200, right? And like you'll have to eat crow and figure it out later. Or you could just kind of take the money and go upstairs, realize that, you pissed it away at a craps table earlier in the night and you live to fight another day. And I do think that there are merits in both strategies. Like, right? Like there is something to be said about going for it, right? Like scared money doesn't make money. There is also
Phoenix. Like, look at Phoenix. I mean, it's probably not going to work, but you can't say Matt Ishbia and James Jones like aren't going for it and aren't doing everything within their power to try to build the best team possible.
And look, and there's sometimes it's hard to like explain to a fan base the merits in retreating, and you're not necessarily retreating either. I just think like, and I'll probably write about this again for the 50th time, but it is just like it is a really hard decision. And trying to figure out, what to do, what not to do, what to do, it does sort of just freeze you. You just get frozen. And I think, like, you put it well in the other day, like, they just sort of have to pick. They do have to make a choice here. And, like, the Dorian Finney-Smith trade is not making a choice. I mean, it made one choice, by the way. It, like, knocked you out of, like, basically being able to make a huge trade. Because D'Angelo Russell is not in that deal anymore. Like, you do not have that expiring contract. That was the best contract you had to send out. That is gone. So it probably knocks you down a tier in the types of deals you're able to make. But you have to decide if, like, is it worth putting this money into play, for something? And even now, like, when you talk to people, when you read stuff, like, Shams had this line in his story. I've reported it too, where it's like, we're willing to move the first round picks for a player that can help us now and in the future. Awesome. Like, of course you are. Like, who wouldn't? Like, that's not a real choice. Like, the real question
is that Walker Kessler music?
No, like I was going to say, like the real question is, are you willing to move the first round picks for a player that'll just help you now and might screw you in the future? Like, that's like a more realistic question. That's a more realistic choice the Lakers are going to have to make. And I think the answer right now is probably no, but we'll see.
What
do you give that rant to? Can you grade that rant for me?
I think it was a solid B+.
That sounds about right.
Like, why I like I think the one thing with your analogy is like there's an to me it's what you said, but I think you're on a trip with your friends and you promised like maybe you've been a little
mutually assured destruction is like sort of assumed. Yeah.
Well, but maybe you've had a couple of nights where like you've called it, or like, you know, it's a multi-day trip. You've called it early a couple of nights, and your friends are like, tonight you are coming out with us, and you are like, pick whatever number you're gonna spend or gamble tonight, and you're staying out with us until 4 or 5 a.m. whatever, until we go home. And then now it's getting to 1 or 2 o'clock, and you're kind of like, well, I don't know if I want to spend this money. I don't know if I want to stay out this late. And it's like, you have a fan base who the standard, like fair or not, is championship or bust every season. And you say that publicly. Then you also have two guys in LeBron and AD who, as you said, LeBron, most win now player of all time. A guy
have another shot. Have some more Lobos. Have some more Lobos.
A guy who's like in the GOAT conversation. And like this stuff matters for LeBron's legacy. Just like if LeBron wins a 5th championship, like that will sway some people in the whole. Not you. I'm not saying you, but there are people who right now have a number 2. He wins another one. He's number 1 for them. AD is 31, about to be 32. Like his window is closing as well. So I just look at it like, I think you can look at it in a vacuum in terms of like what's best for the Lakers as an organization. But I think there are the partners that you've invested with in LeBron and AD. I also think there's the fan base and the way things have been presented publicly for the last couple of years in terms of we want to make these trades, but we don't have the assets. They have the assets now. Now, is it worth overpaying and the risk of that? That's its own conversation that I think we would have to dive in more. But like
episode 195, Jovan, episode 195 of Buha's Block will be during Summer League ballpark. We will enact the scenario and we will see what the decision is. We will go out.
We will vlog it.
We will set a limit. We will set a price limit, and we will make a promise to each other for mutually assured destruction the next day.
All right,
and we will see around like 1:30 how we're feeling. If we're willing to really like push through and make some bad decisions, or if we're going to be modest and live to drink again.
Someone will make the $10,000. Someone will end up in jail. That's probably how it's going to go. But let's get into the grades. So this is going to be the controversial part of the podcast. So I've been doing player grades basically since I've been a beat writer, and the formula has changed a little bit, but I try to tailor it to each player relative to expectations. As a disclaimer, just to be clear, just because two players are close together or even have the same grade does not mean I view them the same. I do try to, again, tailor it to each player, their contract, the preseason expectations, the in-season expectations, looking at numbers. I'm kind of keeping track of these grades throughout the course of the season. So, but skill set, age, performance, on-off data, all that stuff. So let's start with Mr. LeBron James. He is averaging 40 years old, year 22 season, averaging just under 24 points a game, about 7.5 rebounds a game, 9 assists per game, shooting 51% from the floor, almost 40% on threes, and a true shooting percentage of 60%, which is really, really good, especially for a high usage guy. Really, the only knock in his statistical profile is the team is 8.8 points per 100 possessions better with him off the floor, which is pretty jarring and surprising. Although I think you could look at some of the bench units and attribute it to some of the lineups he's played in. But overall, I think the stuff that LeBron is doing, you mentioned the triple doubles, 9 this season, second most in the NBA. He has looked like an all-star and maybe like third team all-NBA guy at times. So for me, considering his age, considering like we're in unprecedented territory here, I'm giving LeBron an A-. What do you think about that grade?
I think that's probably where I would have it. Maybe even a tick lower. Like you could, like, here's the argument for B+, right? Is that he played probably about an 8-game stretch of the worst basketball of his life.
Yeah.
You know, And he was dealing with some injury stuff. Obviously needed a reset both mentally and physically. There in what was that? Like November-ish, December-ish, around the in-season tournament time.
Yeah, it was like early
late
to
November,
mid-December.
late November, early December.
Was
right?
when
Like,
that was when the stretch started, and then he took the break.
A real bad stretch of basketball. In a way that like we're not used to seeing him play. So that counts. It matters. That's not where he is today. I still would like to see more defensive consistency. I think there are unrealistic expectations of asking a 40-year-old to be your best two-way player. He's going to take defensive possessions off if he has to do a lot on offense. There are going to be slow rotations and things like that. Still LeBron James. A- B plus. Like I can live with that.
Yeah, so I have some numbers here quickly, and you can respond to any of these, but I just found them relatively interesting. So 8 more touches per game this season. So he's been more involved offensively. And I think that in part is because of the D'Lo trade and LA sort of consolidating the offense more around LeBron, AD, and Austin. He's scoring less, passing more, slightly more turnovers. It is his highest turnover percentage as a Laker. Second highest assist percentage of his Lakers tenure outside of the championship season. Defensively, to your point, he is allowing 3% worse rim field goal percentage. So guys are scoring at the rim easier against him. And a bulk of that on-off difference is the defensive end. LA is 8.5 points per 100 possessions worse with him defensively on the floor. So you see offensively, they're basically the same with or without him. It's really the defensive end where they're struggling when he's on the floor. So that's I think that's the biggest knock, right?
I have a real dumb stat that probably it shouldn't be that surprising. So I just did like a quick like plus minus search for LeBron this season. And in games where he is a minus, let me see here. There have been 19 of them. The Lakers have won twice.
Wow.
They're 2-17 when he's been a minus. And when he is a plus, when they win his minutes, which has been, let's see here, 15 times, they are 14-1.
Wow. That's wild.
If you even go to even, they've only lost once, and that was at Atlanta. It was a +3,
which was that was a crazy game.
Yeah, I mean, I think like when he's been good and he's been good in their lineups, they've been really good. And when he's struggled and the players around him have struggled, I think that's the thing with LeBron. That's why he's so hard to grade in this way. Is that like sort of how he plays and the way he plays, just like it does factor heavily into how people play around him.
He can't carry lineups the same way he used to because one and we'll get into. I don't know if I mentioned we're going to be grading JJ as well at the very end. Like one small knock I would say in my opinion has been like I think he's kind of treated LeBron as if he can carry some of these lineups, and you'll see like he's often with. If we're ranking the Lakers rotation players, which we kind of are in this exercise, he's often playing with like the fringe guys in the rotation, and it'll be AD with Austin and Max and Rui, and then like a fifth guy where it's like LeBron with Jaxson Hayes, Gabe Vincent, Cam Reddish, or Dalton, and then like maybe one other starter. But he's been with a lot of bench-centric units, and he used to prop those up earlier in his Lakers. I mean, even going back to, I would say as recently as last season, you could kind of put 4 semi-random guys with LeBron and have a productive lineup. This year, there's been some slippage. I just look at like from the mileage and the age, this guy should not be this good still. So it's like that's where I come to the A-. But I mean, maybe B plus A- somewhere in there.
It just depends. If we're grading him to LeBron standards, it's been a rough season in a lot of ways.
Yes, I agree with that.
If we're grading him on the standards that should apply to anybody in a realistic standpoint, I mean, he's still one of the 15 to 20 best players in the league, and some nights it's better than that.
Yeah, no,
so it's pretty remarkable. Yeah,
for agreement. Let's get to Anthony Davis. AD is averaging 25.7 points per game, just under 12 rebounds, 3.5 assists. This is nuts, but 1.3 steals and 2.2 blocks. It is just a stock machine. 52% from the floor, 60% true shooting percentage, 35 minutes a game. So his minutes have stayed in that mid 30s range, as they've talked about trying to get him a little bit more rest at various points, but it hasn't really happened. Same with LeBron. He's also at 35. But the big difference between AD and LeBron, just from their base statistical profile, is the Lakers are plus 4.3 points per 100 possessions with AD on the floor. Again, minus almost 9 with LeBron on the floor. So that's a 13 points per 100 possession swing right there. AD for me, I'm giving him an A- as well. And there was certainly a point in the season where I would have considered an A or an A+. I think recently it has slipped a bit, and he's had some rougher performances in some of these games against good teams that they've gotten blown out. I think the defense has slipped a bit. I have some numbers on that, but A- for AD, what do you make of that grade?
Yeah, that sounds about right for him too, right? Like we've seen some improvements, like obviously, right? Like this is a team that swept Sacramento this year, in large part because of how he played in those games against Sabonis, which was a matchup, obviously, that sort of famously had given him trouble. I do agree with you that I think there hasn't been, and this is more like, we watch basketball very differently. Like I tend to watch it more like spiritually, like when trying to watch players in that way. Like I don't look at a lot of numbers. It's just not it's not a knock on it. It's just, quite frankly, I'm not as interested. And when I see an Anthony Davis is like when he's super engaged, when he is playing with force, when he is playing with decisiveness, he is maybe the third best center in the NBA when those things are happening. I think there are too many centers that can play him out of that with physicality. And I think on a team that has some sort of physicality issues, that's one of the problems, right? So, the
Zubats in the Clippers game.
Yeah, Jokic, Sengun, like this type of player is generally speaking a little bit of an issue. But I think, look, some real low lows this year for Anthony Davis. We're doing like a sliding door thing. Missed maybe the biggest shot of their season at the free throw line against Orlando.
I mean, that does feel like 10-4. We're about to be 11-4. At the time, Orlando was playing really well, about to have a good home win, and then things kind of went off the rails there for a couple. I mean, then they get shellacked by Denver and Phoenix in back-to-back games in the second halves, and it felt like that was a turning point for their season.
And he's a guy too, and I see this with LeBron as well. Like when things are rough and like they're blowing defensive coverages and they're not running the offense the way they're supposed to run, like you can tell with those guys, right? And that's not always, I think, the best, especially when you're talking about like what's going to have to be some sort of an 82-game process for this team to hit its stride in a real way. Like it's going to have to be cohesiveness that kind of carries them. It's not going to be top to bottom talent. But that being said, I mean, look, at his job, like he's so good at being a complimentary star. He's so good at it. Like in terms of like being a number 2, like you can make an A+ case for him. Like he's just perfect at it. He's perfect at it. I mean, he doesn't rock the boat. Like he does enough of like the little stuff. Made a huge play the other night, just like diving for a loose ball. Like we're seeing some more of that. I just think it just has to. It's like all these guys. It's consistency.
I would say the only issue with the statement you just made is that they wanted him to be the number 1 guy this year, and that we've gradually seen a shift more from an 80-centric offense and team to a LeBron-centric offense and team.
So a 1A, a 1B, a 1C, actually, almost in a lot of ways in terms of usage and things like that. Yep.
But a couple of interesting numbers with AD. So for all the talk about making him a hub and running the offense more through him, he's only averaging 4 more touches per game this season. So that, and I'm sure if we isolated it for earlier in the season, that number would be higher, but 4 is not a big difference. Really, I mean, from a overall statistical profile, like this is arguably his second best season as a Laker after the title year. A lot of his numbers are right there in terms of points, rebounds, blocks, steals, like in line with his best seasons as a Laker. But two notable areas where he's slipped. He's shooting 14% worse out of the post which is a big number. That is a big drop off. He went from 52% in the post last season to 38% on post ups this season. That's like his post game has not been the same as it was last year or in previous years. And then defensive field goal percentage allowed at the rim is 4% worse this year. So when we're talking about best defender in the world, and I think AD has belonged in that conversation for the last few years and really for a lot of his career, I think that stuff matters. And I do think there's been some defensive slippage, but I think we're largely on the same page for these two. Now let's ruffle some feathers with a guy that, for whatever reason, whenever I talk about him, is the most polarizing Laker, it seems like. But Austin Reaves having a career year as the clear number 3 on the Lakers. And some of these numbers are much higher if we're looking at since the D'Lo trade or even dating back to December. But on the season, Austin is averaging 18.3 points per game, 4.1 rebounds per game, 6.1 assists per game, 1.1 steals per game, shooting 44% from the floor, 36% on threes, 58% true shooting, and the best on off in the rotation at plus 8.6 points per 100 possessions. I gave Austin a B+. I was really close to A-, B+ for him. I think some of the defensive slippage, I've long felt Austin has been an underrated defender, and I think people forget, like, earlier in his career, the Lakers were actually using him as an on-ball stopper. And even parts of like last season under Darvin, he was supposed to be like this backcourt stopper. And really even this season, JJ used him as that when D'Lo was still there. And for those watching on YouTube, you are not crazy. My camera has been dying during the interview, so I just switched to my phone. So it is
too handsome.
Different.
We're both too handsome.
Different camera. But the camera was too hot. I was too hot to handle for it. So on the Austin front, I think the defensive slippage and the turnovers have really been the two things that have, in my opinion, have kept him from an A-. But he is, in my opinion, taken a leap that I think the Lakers believed he could take, and I think the Austin optimists felt he could take. But I do think, whether it was within the fan base or just around the league, there was some skepticism of, like, could he look like a legitimate number 3? And I really think since this trade, and even I would say like a week or two before the trade, his leap in playmaking and decision making and the way that the Lakers are using him as a true number 3 option. And people, I get into it all the time with people in the Q&A or whatever about his consistency, but there are not many number 3 options in the league that are averaging 20 points and 7 assists a game the way that he has been over this stretch. So for me, I give Austin a B+. Do you think that's fair? Do you think that's too low? What do you think?
No, that's right. And I think the way that I would view his season is through 2 lenses, right? At the things that he is good at, it has been an A, almost to an A+, right? Like the things that he is capable of doing currently, he is maximizing some of those skills. Still misses too many open threes. He would tell you that, like kind of those swing dagger threes and stuff like that. You can tell those shots. And I think he does have another place that he has to get to physically to handle this job. We saw it the other night against Brooklyn, right? Where you saw kind of his legs go out from underneath him in the last few minutes, miss, I think, 3 or 4 shots down the stretch as he kind of was the number 1 option in that game. I think the things that he struggles with need real work, right? Which is handling ball pressure, handling being hunted defensively. Like those are like the 2 biggest things, right? And he is like the thing with Austin, though, and I've felt this way since he was a rookie. You've heard me say this. His superpower is like the ability to like figure it out. He is an elite problem solver in terms of what it takes to get down the court, in terms of what it takes to try to get to wins. He has that ability to find the cracks in the game and to try to do the right thing. And I think eventually that will carry over to him as he moves into this role, like full time, right? Is that I believe he'll figure it out because everything that they put in front of him, he's figured out so far. So obviously, like the areas in which he needs to improve are very clear. But the things that he's asked to do as sort of a complementary player, as sort of like the guy to underrated thing with Austin Reaves, really underrated thing with Austin Reaves, his importance in the locker room, like incredibly important presence and their locker room is really the bridge in a lot of ways between, the stars and the role players, the guy who's kind of counted on to talk to everybody. I think that is, especially too when very close with D'Angelo Russell, obviously has the respect of the stars too. So I think that factors in this. Room to grow as a leader, room to grow as a ball handler and a decision maker. And obviously I think the defensive stuff, but like the other part of the defensive stuff too, is as this group becomes a better team defense, I think that'll help him in that way, right? Like that's going to have to be how he is a team defender. He knows that, but good season, really good season.
I also think for me, this is part of the argument for starting DFS over Rui is I like the fit of DFS and Max around Austin, LeBron, and AD, and specifically with just knowing that no matter what team they're facing, they have two quality perimeter defenders to put out there on any matchup. Mm-hmm. And if it's a guard, you can put Max. If it's a wing, you can put DFS. But I think right now with the current group, it's like there are some times where Max has to guard up a little bit, or he takes the backcourt guy. Then there's a conversation of like who's taking the second guy, and sometimes that has to be Austin. And I think that's overtaxing him a little bit. I also think there's an element of like, so this is a key stat with Austin that I found interesting. 19 more touches per game. That is a significant increase. And huge, I don't think this is not 2K. We can't just assume that a guy can take on that much more usage and have an increased role the way that Austin has without there being some parts of your game that slip. And I think for him, it's partly been the defensive side. And there's a reason why a lot of like elite shot creating high usage guards are not plus defenders. Part of it can be physical limitation sometimes, but part of it's just like you're expending so much energy on one side of the ball that it's hard to give your best effort and just have the legs on the other side of the ball. And I think given how much they've asked of Austin on that side, I think it's understandable that his defense has not quite been at the same level that it's been in previous seasons. So that would
and his efficiency has certainly dipped. Right. Like,
it has.
And it's dipped every year as his role has gone up. Mm-hmm. That's just, statistical fact. I think there are, again, though, I think there are ways systematically to like hide some of this stuff. And I think they're still figuring this stuff out a little bit. But, look, if we're grading on who he is versus sort of expectation, good year. It's been a good year. I think now the interesting thing is that, when we do this at the end of the season, or if we do this next year, the expectations are increasing, right? Like now, this is a guy that is on track. If you're going to be a third guy on a contending team, that means you have real all-star potential, like real all-star potential. And, that's the standard. And so he's going to have to hit that.
Yeah. Let's get into Rui. So Rui Hachimura this season, 12 points a game, 5 rebounds a game, shooting 49% from the floor, 41% on threes. And he is second on the team in on-off among DFS is technically second, but among the real regulars throughout the season, Lakers are 5.8 points per 100 possessions better with Rui on the floor. So I went with a B- for Rui. I keep looking at the wrong camera here, so I'm still getting used to it. B- for Rui, because I think if we did this earlier in the season, first half of the season, I'd probably have a B or B+ grade for him. I thought he had a solid start to the year. I think there's been some slippage. I think especially since the DFS trade, he has been he's not looked as comfortable. I don't know if it's been because of that trade and him maybe looking over his shoulder at a guy who has closed over him at times, a guy who's, I think, frankly, been better than him since the trade between the two. But there's been like, he's, I think, there too with the inconsistency of like some nights the defense in terms of helping, in terms of on-ball stuff, like they've asked him to kind of be a stopper. That's not really in his wheelhouse. The shooting and just the passivity offensively, which he can kind of float out there a bit. So I know right now this is the most popular trade target for the fan base, and everyone wants to ship Rui out and move him for something else. But from an on-off, like I look at the on-off data pretty seriously, and like they've been better on both sides of the ball with him. Again, second best mark in the rotation behind Austin. They have been better with Rui on the floor. I just think ultimately he's been put in a position where defensively they've relied on him a little bit too much for what he's capable of. And we'll get to it a little bit with DFS, but like I think a natural shift should be DFS starting Rui coming off the bench. And that could also unlock a better version of him offensively if you could put him in certain lineups where he's featured a little bit more. But what do you think of Rui as a B-? Is that too low?
I think it's too low. I think it's too low. I think it's
Okay.
significantly too low, actually.
Okay.
I think when you talk to people inside their building, they would probably have that as an A- so far. Again,
Okay.
like based on where your expectations are. JJ Redick has said this, right? In terms of like guys who I like, here is your job, go do your job. He has been number one in terms of consistency and doing that right now. Like the whole team, like when he is not good, it is very easy to see when he is not good. But like, I do think like there was a game earlier this year, right before the DFS trade, where it was like, oh, like a physical wing who tries hard on defense, who can make threes and play in transition. If they can only have one of those, and it's like, oh wait, like Rui Hachimura has like been one of the best guys in the league this year with like that sort of physical profile. Certainly one of the most efficient 3-point shooters. And that's just like, and it does sort of feel like
shooter. He's been their best shooter.
And it does sort of feel like, but I think that like, the reason why B- isn't crazy is there is still like this feeling, right? And it's hard to like fully explain that like if he is important, you're just not good enough. And that you have to reconcile that. And I think, with Rui, routine matters, role definition matters. We saw that on the run of the conference finals. Once Darvin Ham kind of like zeroed in on a job for Rui Hachimura, started playing much better basketball. I think him being in the starting lineup, he's been very comfortable there. He's comfortable with that group. The DFS sort of minutes issue with his ankle, to me, would like limit some of my willingness to change the lineup again. But you need the best version of this guy if you're going to matter. I think he's had a pretty good year. And I think relative to expectations too, the limitations are what they are, but I think on the whole, right? Like, I mean, he's tried to, I think the gap
I think
between
there's been
like
some slippage a lot. I
agree with you.
Is like,
I totally agree with you, by the way.
I don't want to have recency bias, and I've tried to eliminate, because like some of these guys, the grades are going to maybe be a little bit lower than or higher than you would expect based on their recent play. And Rui was one of those guys I struggled with. Like, I don't know if I'd go as high as a B plus A minus. I was considering a B, but I was also considering a C plus, and I was like, feels like B minus is kind of in the middle there, obviously.
Sure.
But I feel like, to me also, like rewatching a lot, I think the Lakers have a larger problem where the LeBron, Austin, Rui trio is not good enough defensively. And there are too many mistakes. Like, it's either LeBron or Rui not rotating or losing their men off the ball, or Austin getting targeted. And that trio together, I think, puts so much pressure on AD and Max to be like perfect defensively. And that's where I think
this is one of the issues with this exercise, right? Is that like individually, I think Rui Hachimura has maybe had a really good season. Like how that fits and like what his really good looks like next to what they're getting from LeBron James, what they're getting from Anthony Davis, what they're getting from everybody else is hard. Like, I think if we view these players individually, at least for me, I feel pretty good about most of what they've done based on what they've been asked to do on the whole. And I guess maybe that's why they're sixth in the West, because I don't feel great about it, but I feel pretty good about it. But yeah, we should go on. Like, I think Rui's an interesting one. And you're right on the trade front, by the way. You're right on the trade front. He is their most direct pathway to making a quote-unquote bigger trade. That is the one, right? Like, it is the contract.
He's also, to your point, he's viewed well internally. He matters. Like, they value him.
I spoke to a Lakers source, right? Ready? Hoop Central.
Here we go.
I spoke to a Lakers source about this where I was talking about a trade that involves Rui Hachimura going out in the trade, and they're like, I don't know, Rui's pretty good. And that is the thing. I think that people have to realize is that there is a reason why that is not a contract, that is not a player you might have to attach the same assets to that you would if you were sending out, say, Jarred Vanderbilt in a trade. It's important to remember that he has real value. He has value to what they're doing.
Speaking of Jarred Vanderbilt, we do have some breaking news that happened during our recording. Jarred Vanderbilt is set to make his season debut on Saturday in Golden State or in San Francisco against the Warriors, per Shams Charania of ESPN. Do you have a quick reaction to that? It's obviously been trending this way.
Yeah, this is the path we've been on
today at practice, but yeah.
Yeah, I think there was some hope earlier that it would be Thursday against Boston. Obviously, that's not happening. But I think, look, right, they want to be cautious here, and this has all been about caution. It's been about caution. And getting him right, getting him healthy, so he can matter. I'm not expecting a ton from Jarred Vanderbilt, particularly early. He hasn't played basketball in a year. But I think some of the things he does well, playing hard, defending, rebounding, those aren't really rhythm things as much as other stuff, right? We saw last year, some of the ways that Gabe Vincent had a positive impact as he came back, particularly in those New Orleans games, by just playing hard, even though he couldn't make a shot, even though he was in a bad offensive rhythm. I would anticipate it'll look sort of like that. But yeah, it's important 2 weeks because, as we talk about this stuff, and you talk about trades, the optionality of Jarred Vanderbilt, if you can somehow convince yourself that he's reliable in this way, which is it's a big ask because of the
it's a big ask in 2 weeks. Yeah.
Yeah. But if you can convince yourself of that, it does give you more options.
All right, let's talk about Max. We'll do a couple more guys, then I'll go through them quickly. Just rip through some, and then we'll touch on JJ and get out of here. Max, I gave a B, and again, I think it's kind of similar to almost the inverse of Rui. Of beginning of the season, Max was pretty awful to be honest, and gets benched. The Lakers had, you look at the way they used him in the preseason, they had been grooming him to be the number one guy off the bench. They're almost treating him like their sixth man. Then he really struggles on both sides of the ball, which he admits to. I wrote about it. I interviewed him earlier in the season. And then he's out of the rotation for a few games, only plays in garbage time, and then has that game in San Antonio where they go to 1 through 5 switching. He's fronting Wemby. He's bothering him. He makes several shots, has his season high at the time of 11. And from that point on, has really taken off as a progressively important player on this team. And I think with the DFS and Rui kind of situation of you can argue who's the better player, who's more important, who should be starting, who should be closing, etc. Max is sneaking his way up there in terms of importance of I think there are matchups you could argue he's their fourth most important player, just given his defensive skill set. So he's a guy who on the season is numbers don't wow you. 8 points a game, 44% shooting, 36% on threes, minus 2.8 on off. But that's been much better recently. He's been closer to 40% as a starter. And I think he's, again, kind of tale of two halves of the season. Really rough start for the first 10, 12 games. But since then, I think he's been more in that B plus, A minus range.
Yeah, I think that's where I have him too. We're watching the same basketball. I wish I could be more, first takey for you here and argue against you. Excuse me. Since he moved in the starting lineup, Jovan, 11.3 points per game, 38% from three.
That's solid. I think that's what they needed.
Fifth starter, that is what you want. I think the shot making has been really important. I think the finishing at the rim, and this is another thing too with the Lakers, and we've seen this the last few years with young players. When you are a young player that does something that the rest of the roster does not do, it stands out. It really stands out. And there have been games this year where you see his sort of lateral quickness, you see his athleticism, you see his ability to block shots by guards as they attack. He got Ja Morant. I don't have a block shot number in front of me right now. Half a block a game. But he feels he's a real deterrent, he blocked 3 shots against Washington last night. And like that is, I think, as a guy, as his confidence grows, and it should grow, he's a real weapon. Early in the year, my sources almost unanimously termed this a bad contract, that the Lakers overpaid. The Lakers weren't really bidding against anybody. Why would they do this? He is now a good contract. Like, it has changed, like, very quickly. Early in the season, he would have been a guy, that when we were talking about Valanciunas trades and stuff with sources, like, he was a guy Washington wanted. And I think there was a time the Lakers might have done it. Like that contract was almost in some ways designed to be moved down the road. Like that was part of the reason why they got the number to what they got. And I think now it's like, no, like I don't want to say he's untouchable, but you've got to get a real, real good player back if you're going to trade Max Christie, because there just aren't that many 21-year-olds in the league that embrace their role, that have size, athleticism, and a willingness to do the dirty work. Like, I think that's the really encouraging stuff, is that he knows what success for him is going to look like, and he is like committed to that track. They love him. Good season, really good season, look, really good bounce back.
You don't have to sell me on Max Christie, okay? I would say like 2 other minor things, like the rebounding has slipped, which I found interesting, is like in a larger role. I thought that maybe the rebounding would be more of a strength, but it's become less.
He's away from the basket, but he's also away from the basket, more primary
defenders
and stuff. Yeah.
But 2, I mean, I think there's also been some growing pains in terms of like late game mistakes, and it's not all been on him, but like I think there's been a couple of close games where he's made some key mistakes, and
he will, and he's going to.
He will. He's 21, and like he's 2 years younger than Dalton, which is just insane. This season, his 3rd season, but maybe my B's too low. I think for how bad the beginning was, and then like,
sure,
I think he's had some ups and downs as a starter. It hasn't been all peaches and cream, but overall, I think like B is the 4th highest grade on the team. So in my opinion, so that's
he's been really good.
I'm rating him highly.
Like next one. So it's one of those things when I say he's been really good too, it's like it's relative. He's been like relative. to expectations, to like, I think, I don't know that people thought he'd be the starting shooting guard, and he is definitively their starting shooting guard. So
let's rip off a few here, and if you want to interject or strongly disagree with any of these, Gabe Vincent has been shooting the ball much better recently, but this is one where I don't want to have recency bias for how bad the first 2 months were, because still on the season, 39% overall, 31% on threes, averaging under 5 points a game despite playing 20 minutes a game. And I know he's not necessarily viewed as a scorer, but I do think the Lakers at times have really needed that like 4th or 5th option. Gabe Vincent on paper has the pedigree and the skill set to do that. It has not materialized consistently, at least. So I gave Gabe a C, and that's with both, like, again, more recent version of Gabe, I'd probably give a B or B plus. The first 20 games of Gabe, I'd probably give a D plus. So I think somewhere in there is like a C to me. Like he's, so, and looking at the shooting in particular, shot 23.6% first 22 games of the season on threes, 40% the last 15 games. So we'll see which one of the, like, it's probably somewhere in the middle, but we'll see which one of those ends up sticking. DFS, tough guy to grade because he's only played 8 games, but 7 points a game, 3 rebounds a game, shooting 47%, 42% on threes. As I mentioned, second best on the team and on off at plus 8.2. I gave him a B. I think he's had some rough games, and that's to be expected. He's dealing with this ankle situation. He also had a son, so that, like, that Clippers game kind of came back, wasn't quite himself. But I think 4 of his last 6 games, he's looked pretty solid and has been a significant contributor on both sides of the ball. So I think he's a B, but that might be trending up depending on how you view it. Dalton Knecht, 9 points a game, 45% shooting, 34 on threes. I gave Dalton a C plus, and that was one of the hardest ones for me to grade. But if you look at his shooting splits by month, 35% on threes in October, 46% in November, which was that insane stretch he had, 16% in December, and 27% in January. And with Dalton right now, I'm kind of only grading him on his shooting because we know everything else is a work in progress. He's trying defensively, but he's limited. Yeah, I think the rebounding has slipped a bit. He's largely trying to do the right things, but ultimately what determines how much he plays is, does he have the flamethrower that night? And two, consistently, he has not had the flamethrower for the past month and a half. He's had a few nice double-digit scoring games. Otherwise, it's a lot of 1 for 3s, 1 for 4s. And for a guy who I think gets pretty good looks, it's not like teams have schemed for him, but he still is getting a lot of good looks. I'd like to see more consistency from the shooting. And then I have here Jaxson Hayes and Cam Reddish are both C minuses for me. Jackson's one that I think the team would probably disagree with, but I just don't. I view him more as like a 2.5 string center and not a true backup center on a team with serious aspirations because of how bad of a rebounder he is, how bad of a rim protector he is, and how much he fouls. I think those, like, in my opinion, those are the skill sets that you really need at that backup 5 spot. And yes, he gets 1 or 2 nice lobs per game, and he does play with a certain energy, but I don't think it quite I don't think it translates to winning basketball necessarily as much as you would hope. So I have both of those guys at a C minus. Then Shake Milton, a D minus. He had a nice first shift, and then it's been downhill since there. And this is the craziest stat of everything I've found throughout this whole process. Lakers are 25.5 points per 100 possessions worse with Shake Milton on the floor. Small sample size, 10 minutes a game, 6 games, but they've been getting killed with Shake Milton out there. And he has been in a lot of bench lineups. The Lakers bench has struggled largely for the past couple of weeks, but the Shake minutes have, you just want him to come in, hit a couple shots, and maybe get on a heater. He's not done that. He had the first shift where he hit, I think, 2 shots, and then I don't think he's hit 2 shots in any other game since then. So to me, I didn't give him an F because he's new and whatever, but he's been picked on defensively. He hasn't been making shots. JHS is the last guy I gave an F to, because that's just been a disaster of a situation. Anything you want to
can we talk?
Let's
talk. Can we talk about Jalen Hood-Schifino? That's
sure.
Not a thing that happens ever, right?
Yeah.
It's hard to know with injuries, right? If it's toughness, if it's bad luck, if it's preparation, that stuff's really hard to know, right? Some people's bodies are some people's bodies. Just horrible timing for Jalen Hood-Schifino this year, because in that game at Utah when he played, because he had to play, he flashed some of the stuff that they actually could really use right now, right? Offensive initiator, can handle pressure with his size, played really physical defense against Colin Sexton and Keontae George. I think there was he forced a turnover on the sidelines in that game where it was a real a pop defensive play, the kind of thing that a coach would show in film. And then he was instantly hurt again with a hamstring injury. He has become a total afterthought. Despite the Lakers' claims that they're not giving up on him, he is not a part of their plans even a little bit. And for a team that desperately needs another playmaker, not having him available, not having a player that they drafted in the middle of the first round, just 2 seasons ago. Just a killer.
Decline his third year option. That's about as and this is a group that you've mentioned earlier in the show. They don't exactly love admitting their mistakes, and there's an element I think of pride, and especially with the scouting department and just the whole front, that's been a point of pride for them is they've drafted incredibly well over the past 10, 12 years, and developed. And you look at, there's far more hits than misses. And I've argued that's been their best part of the front office and organization basically for the last decade is I think you can really put their scouting and the guys they've identified with basically your Miamis, your San Antonios, your Torontos, some of these teams that have identified late first, second round undrafted guys. The Lakers are right there in that conversation over the past, decade plus. But this was just an all-around disaster because you look at the 3 guys that went after him, You would take any of them in a heartbeat over him. Jaime Jaquez, Brandon Pajemski, and Cam Whitmore. You look at, again, them admitting before the season started. Remember, it was before the season, or right, I guess it was maybe like Halloween they had to decide. A week into the season, you give up on this guy, essentially. Like, they can frame it however they want to, but he's played in 2 games all season, largely due to injury. But frankly, if he was healthy for the whole season, I don't know how much he'd be playing. And I don't want to like continue to pile on, but you mentioned the Utah game. Like, I think the standard was so low that it's like that, even that game, this is a guy who you want to be scoring, facilitating, kind of like he's more of an offensive guy for this group. In theory, 4 points, 1 assist, took 1 shot, was a plus 12.
Plus 12.
But
he was a
but
plus
also
12.
had 3 fouls, and I thought he was played physical defensively. He took like, he had some nice. No, it's good. But I'm saying, like, that's how low, like, that was probably the best game he's played as a Laker.
So,
and
yeah, let me so I think, like, again, as we talk about these guys, like, so much of this is like, so we were talking with Amin Al Hassan yesterday, and one of the things that I brought up was like hierarchy, right? And like a total belief in hierarchy. And like, if you're the third point guard, if you're the 12th or 13th guy in a rotation, and that's what Jalen Hood-Schifino is on this team, like, come in, play hard as hell. Can I swear?
Yeah.
Foul the shit out of people. Like, this team needs more fouling the shit out of people, like, on the perimeter. I
agree.
You know, and I think, like, it was very encouraging. Like, you watch that game and it was like, okay, like I saw it. Like, I didn't totally see it, but like, you saw that there could potentially be use mined out of this player. And like, and again, horrible luck. You just feel like it's just horrible luck that, like, his body is what it is. You know, he hasn't played since. Hasn't played a G League game since.
Yeah,
like,
it's just, yeah,
it's probably worth checking in on. It's probably something worth checking in on. But like, yeah, I meand it is, at this point, he is just somebody that will be in a trade because of the money's expiring. You know, and I don't know what's next for him as a pro. And it's like for a player that they were like that, you know, pockets of the front office were pretty high on. Disappointing. It's just been really disappointing.
Then the incomplete grades as far as the rest of the roster: Vando, Christian Wood have not played. We will, I guess, have a grade on Vando relatively soon, though he's going to be eased in, so we want to have relatively low expectations to start. Bronny was a guy that I don't really know how to grade because
I have a grade.
Go for it.
A+.
There we go.
A+. He is like again, 15th guy on the roster, right? Developmental project, all of that stuff. Weird ass situation, right? People chanting, "We want Bronny." Like, I mean, there was a third quarter, "We want Bronny" chants.
Well, we were talking about it. Third quarter, "We want Bronny" chant. Washington immediately goes on an 8-0 run, and like the arena starts to get tight, and it's like,
yeah. So weird situation. He is great in the locker room. People really like him. He works hard.
Great guy.
Yeah. And it's like, and look, and like, this is a weird standard to grade somebody on. Like, obviously has a lot of work to do as a player, needs to get in better shape to play the style that they want him to play, in terms of like, if he's going to be a 94-foot, like Javon Carter type disruptor, has a lot of work. But I think he's flashed enough at times in the G League. He's also had some weird stuff happen in terms of injuries and health. You know, had the flu. He's lost 5 pounds. I talked to him a little bit about this after the game from his last like sort of illness. Like, whatever. We'll see what happens long term. I just think, like, in terms of like the disruption element at this, and like in terms of the risk that the Lakers took on by putting this player into the fold, they have escaped all of that. Like, it hasn't been a thing.
Yeah, I guess for me, the reason I had trouble grading was we've only really
seen him
in garbage. He doesn't play. So it's like, I don't know how to like, and I also think it's like, that's in line, but that's also in line with what we expected. We didn't expect like him to come in and all of a sudden be like the 9th man or something. So I think it's largely been in line with expectations. But I will
say crazy Bronny James fact for you really quickly too. I was at Dick's Sporting Goods in Torrance with my are they a sponsor of the block? Dick's
no.
Sporting Goods?
No, but
you should work on
they
that.
should be. Yeah.
Yeah. There were 4 Lakers jerseys for sale. 4 different players: LeBron James, Anthony Davis, Austin Reaves, and Bronny James. Those were the 4 jerseys you could buy.
He's arguably the 3rd most famous Laker.
Second.
Right? I mean, second, I guess, technically.
Yeah.
So, and then final one, let's get out of here on this. This was a tough one to grade for a variety of reasons, but JJ Redick, as I mentioned at the top, the Lakers are 23-18. That's a 56.1% win percentage, 6th in the West, 13th in offense, 22nd in defense, 21st in net rating. So from a record standpoint, I feel like this team is kind of where we thought they'd be, if not maybe even like you could argue slightly higher. Like I know talking to Lakers people at the beginning of the season, they kind of viewed themselves as like a 6 to 8 seed. So right now they're on the higher end of that. At the same time, they have a bottom 10 point differential and net rating, and the 3 teams below them in the West are tanking. So like among the serious teams in the West, they have struggled the most in terms of just overall performance on the court. And yet they've overachieved that with their record. So I give JJ a B. And I know I can already see the comments right now, and there's going to be some people who think that's too high. Maybe some people think that's too low. I'm going to assume people think that's too high because they're upset about the offense or DFS not starting, or like I kind of know all the fan gripes at this point. Maybe I'm too plugged in, but I think like this is a guy who was thrown into a pretty difficult locker room. I think we can say that now, looking at the last 3 coaches, the last few years. Like this is a very difficult locker room to manage. And as we saw it at points of early December, it was a difficult locker room to manage at that stretch. But like for this team to be 5 games above 500, they've had some crazy stuff happen throughout the course of the season. I think he's largely pushed.
His house burned down. His house burned down.
Yes.
You talk about like crazy things.
That's
that
what
have
it's
happened,
like. It's
right?
hard to it's like that. You know, it's you factor that. Like I don't know how you factor that in, but like they had this whole situation in that was like, early January. You know, it's. I think he's largely pushed the right buttons. I think he's been very adaptable and flexible, and maybe sometimes it's not as quickly as like the fan base or even I want him to be with certain things, but I think he's had a growth mindset through the first half of the season. He has taken accountability. He has called himself out. He has pointed out games, game plans, situations where he could be better. I think that's really important for a coach. I think he's largely gotten buy-in from the players, that they've all spoken highly of him for the most part. And I think, again, like to me, I look at this record and some of the net rating, point differential stuff more so just as a reflection of the roster and the limitations. And like, it's not like JJ was given the Celtics or the Cavs or the Thunder and he's underachieving and this team's like barely floating above 500. This is a group that like you can make a case is the 5th best team in the West. You can make a case is the 10th best team in the West, depending on the night, depending on how the role players are performing. And I think to be where they're at, as he pointed out, like a couple games they wish they got back, Atlanta, Orlando. They win those 2 kind of fluky losses. They're 25-16. They're 4th or 5th in the West, and I think we're talking about it in a much more positive sense. So I kind of like, if we're doing a blame pie, and not that we necessarily need to, I would not put JJ atop the blame pie.
What kind of pie? So
put
a blame pie.
Yeah.
Okay.
So a pie chart of blame. I don't even know if I'd have JJ 3rd on that list, but that I'm not going to give you my list, but we'll keep it there. I think all things considered, for a first year coach who's never coached above coaching his kids, I think a B to me is like
that feels about right. That feels about right. And I think, he's got room to grow. He knows he has room to grow. I think some of the online gripes about his play calling and organization rates and different things like that are all valid. I think, part of coaching is getting the players to do what you want. right? And but I also think part of coaching is knowing that and recognizing that when they are not comfortable with that, you have to adapt as well, right? And it is much more art than science, coaching. I think that has been the biggest takeaway of my last 4 years as a day-to-day beat writer on this team, and being around other teams. It's hard. It's a hard job, but and no one should feel sorry for anybody, right? We're judging these people on different things, but I think this situation is really tough. I think trying to get this team to break old habits, to play in new ways, to move away from sort of the isolation mismatch hunting style that they've had to a more motion-based style is or we're playing more through Anthony Davis, and now they've shifted again to play more through Austin Reaves. They've undergone some pretty big identity changes, and that could on one hand be viewed as a weakness. It could be viewed as a strength, depending on how you value adaptability. I think the best coaches put their system second to their personnel. I think Greg Popovich has been the master of this. And really what you're doing is you're just kind of managing the day-to-day sort of emotional state of your team. I think in that way, it's probably been about a B-. This team, this team, you go in there some days and it feels like they could beat anybody. And then you go in there other days, after the Clipper game, and it feels maybe they should just trade everybody. There are pretty wild emotional swings around this group. Yeah. And that sometimes is a reflection of the coach. And I'm not saying he's pretty level-headed, generally speaking, but he's an emotional person.
Outside of during timeouts.
Yeah, good rage timeout.
I love watching him, walking to the free throw line, just pissed off.
And taking 2 steps and just screaming something just horrible into the abyss. Yeah, I mean, I think, but I think in terms of, players love his competitiveness. They love his competitiveness. They love his care factor. He's a very good communicator. And I think there's a belief that he will get better at the other stuff.
A+ with the media, I will say, for whatever that's worth. That's
it's almost like he's done
5% of the grade. Yeah, it's almost like he's done it before. Yeah. But
he's been good to work with.
I'm sure you all watching and listening will have a totally reasonable reaction to my grades.
We're probably not negative enough, right? I think that's part of it. But it is, the reality is, and I think to tie a bow on all of this stuff, right, is when you watch them every day, we are there every day. It's I think my expectations shift, right? You're right. They are not in the top tier of contenders. I'm not sure they can get there with a trade. I don't know. Their only real path, honestly, Jovan, is going to come from internal growth. It's going to come from these players that we've talked about, and the coaching staff figuring out a way to get them better. The stars on this team figuring out better ways to utilize them and utilize their talents around them. And quite frankly, that's not going to happen at Game 41. That's the type of thing, if this works out, that's the type of thing that'll happen around Game 65.
And they have this huge piece now on Vando, who I think, depending on how he looks and how quickly he can get acclimated, that is a big variable that changes the dynamic of this group. You're bigger, you're more athletic, you're better defensively. You're going to have to figure out the offensive end and how he fits into the 5 out versus the 4 out, 1 in, whatever systems that they run. But Vando could be a big piece here. He, I think, is their second best, when healthy, their second best defender. They have not had that guy for the first 41 games.
And to be clear, too, let's add Dorian to that mix, right? I know there is a sense right among Laker fans that the Lakers haven't added a big piece. You have to understand, this was the role player that every contender wanted, right? This was the guy. It wasn't the Lakers were the only team interested in Dorian Finney-Smith, right?
Memphis really wanted him.
Really wanted him. They got quick to market on him. They had a good asset in the D'Angelo Russell expiring contract to use it to get this trade done. I think that is a piece of this that we will see on him. But the player that we've seen when he's been good is the kind of guy that good teams all love to have. And a kind of guy who can matter. Now, there's a difference in mattering for 24 minutes and 34 minutes. If he is able to physically take on a 30-minute a night workload, too, that could tilt the trajectory. They did make a move, and it's a sizable one. But I think in terms of like splash, like we'll see if they're able to, plug one of the other holes in their boat, I guess, just to make another weird metaphor. They're not going to be able to get them all though. And I think they know they're not going to be able to close all the holes. Yeah, they're going to take on water somewhere. They're going to take on water somewhere.
Pick which hole that they're okay with potentially drowning from, I guess, to not get too morbid. But
was that in your wedding vows? Did you mention that?
No, it was not. I did not. But it was
you had picked. You had picked.
Dan had 2 goals going into this episode: not get fired and not be as unserious as the episode with Kobe. And I think we
have we succeeded.
I think at least with one of them. I'm not sure which one, but it did go off the rails. But it's fun. Dan, thank you so much for coming on, and I'm going to apply some pressure to you. I've already talked to the rest of the beat around this, but the people want us to do a beat writer roundtable episode where I don't know if we go live and answer fan questions or we do like a mailbag and answer pre-selected questions, but I think that would be fun to do all 4 of us. So we got to make that happen. I think Dave is the one that's going to be a little tricky to get him on, but we got to make that happen. So
you got to talk to Dave's publicist. You have to talk to Dave's publicist. I know for me, I handle my own media and I am very bookable. I think that would be fun. We could maybe like a Marriott conference center or something like that. Couple bottles of wine maybe, and then really see who can get fired.
Now we're getting dangerous.
And really see who gets fired. Let's do it.
Someone will get fired from that. But Dan, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. We went far over, but
I'll see you in 90 minutes.
I'll see you in
60 minutes.
Where can the good people find you on social media and subscribe to the LA Times if you have not done so already? I'm sure many of you have, but read his great work there. But Dan Woike Sports, I think, on X, Instagram,
on
TikTok,
Instagram,
Blue Sky.
On Blue Sky for sure. TikTok for now. Dan Woike right now with the right pun, I think, is on TikTok. But yeah, hey, young people, buy a newspaper. I want to eat. Seriously, look at me. I'm wasting away. I need to eat. So subscribe. It's good. Do a civic duty.
Dan does a great job. As I mentioned, I've known him since 2011, and he's been a big mentor and guiding force in my career. And I think that you can take that one of 2 ways. But no, seriously, I appreciate you. I appreciate your friendship, and this was fun, long overdue. Thank you all so much for watching and listening. For those watching on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications, and like and comment on this video. For those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. Thank you all again for hitting that 20K mark. Apologies for the camera disruption, but I think this one ended up being okay quality wise. And I will talk to you all Thursday night after the Lakers Celtics game.